Hey everybody, what is going on? Welcome back to another amazing episode of the Shed Organics show. My name is Jordan, and I am still in a bit of a blown away state after that conversation. Erik, who has joined us on the show today, is an incredibly fascinating gentleman with an absolute wealth of knowledge from so many different areas and facets of not only nature and natural systems, but life in general. And the way in which Erik is able to disseminate this information for us today and to really help shine a light on all of these things from a totally different perspective, something that we're not used to hearing in these ways. It's really remarkable and it's really blown me away and really opened my mind to so many things. It's very quickly moved into my top three conversations so far on this podcast. And I'm sure you'll see exactly why once we dive into the conversation. Now, Erik is a botanist. He is also a bit of a design consultant, not only for all of our wonderful gardens, our permaculture land and spaces like this, but also in terms of buildings and cityscapes and architecture, where we're integrating both our modern architecture and buildings and natural spaces, and how you use ecological systems and natural evolutions to build the best gardens that you can in these spaces, not only for what people may want or what people may need, but trying to balance the two of those and try and figure out what they don't know that they need or they don't know that they want. And it's such an interesting conversation that dives into all of these topics. So sit back, enjoy the conversation, and here is Erik from United Natures.
Well, a long time ago in a different country, a different land, I got introduced to plants and I realized that, the question came to mind, the chicken or the egg. Do plants keep us alive or do we keep plants alive? How does it work? And then I realized humans are part of habitats. We're not separate. We're not masters over it. We're in it. We're
Mm.
integrated into it. When you separate the two, it doesn't work. You're taking cogs out of the machine and then it doesn't work. So I launched into that and I studied botany and then decided that I had to study sociology because there's no use just becoming the plant nerd that I am today. It's integrating. And then I realized, you know what? It's not just how we live now, it's how we used to live, where we come from. And so I also studied archaeology. And
Cool.
then as all of these things came together, it became apparent that the plants aren't separate to the rocks and the water. And so I studied climatology and geography and environmental studies. So I did a whole heap of stuff.
Wow.
And over decades, I moved from plants to gardening, horticulture, and then design. So I've had my own wholesale production nurseries. Then I got into revegetation works and ecological works. And then I'd realized I wanted to do design. And I had to design not just for the plant, but for the people. And it
Mm.
all just came together. And permaculture is part of that. And then I landed the job as a living architecture designer. And I was actually brought into an industry that was struggling and failing, pests and diseases. How do you put plants on a building? And it's so artificial. And then I realized it's not artificial. We're asking the wrong questions. Go to habitat, find cliff faces, look at plants growing up trees, epiphytes that have evolved the ability to do this. And I said, why start from scratch and rebuild the wheel? Plug into ecology and evolution and nature and just learn from it and start. And I realized you can't just take a snapshot and recreate it. I'm not trying to recreate nature. I'm bringing it online in layers.
Mm.
And you look at the environment, you look at the people, what are their expectations, what are their needs? And then you look at nature and you say, well, what is nature actually doing? It's evolving this cliff face. It's changing this forest. It's going through succession. And then I
Mm.
realized when you look at the bigger landscape and you see the trees become the shrubs, become the grassland, become the sand dunes, it, it's a constantly changing dynamic and it is warfare.
Yeah.
Everything's working symbiotically and sympatrically together, but they're all competing for resources. But they've been doing it for such a long time that competition is no longer a concept. It's a sharing and pooling, but an extraction. And part of that extraction is killing, which is
Hmm.
entropy, but a
Yes.
huge portion of it is syntropy, and you can't separate the two. And that's how permaculture and syntropics and all of this come together. And that saved the day because I was able to get into living architecture and I reduced the pest issues not by spraying or controlling the pests, but by actually refining the nutrient inputs and reducing
Mm.
them. And then I realized it's plant compatibility. So I started designing ecologically. And then I realized, wow, the plants are actually agents of change that are not here just by chance. They're changing the environment.
Mm.
So a layer of one plant paves the way for the next, and they get absorbed into it. And then you get a crossover. And it's this movement that I think is the genius of it all, is that
Mhm.
when you stop looking at a plant as a thing, as a product, as a nursery label with, the dating
Yeah.
site statistics, you see it as a process, then you can apply it as a living technology and then you plug it in.
You're absolutely right. I think there's so many interesting things that you've already said. Um, th it made me think straight away of something like our weeds, for example, as something that most of us tend to see as this unwanted and irrelevant bunch of plants or species. But the weeds themselves can tell us so much about what the land either needs or what it's trying to work towards. And you've got these seed banks of weed seeds that can stay in the earth for years and years and years. And when the ecosystem itself needs those certain things, this is when they start to come up to try and bring that back to the land. Whether it's like the soil needs holding together, whether the soil needs, deep tap roots to start breaking up compaction. These are the types of things that are coming in. And as you say, they are technologies. It's a ever-changing and evolving landscape where these plants are coming in to serve a purpose and to have a role in bringing the ecosystem back to where it needs to be. And you're right. And imagine on all of these buildings and where these beautiful gardens integrated with our cities and concrete jungles that we have, there would be this kind of neat, well, people would want to be spraying things and going, oh, this just, we want this garden to fit in this certain environment because we like it, but we're going to battle against what nature wants to do in its own cycles to try and create something. Whereas you're coming in and going, let's actually learn from what's out there and try and best supply that or those conditions for them to thrive. And maybe you could go into a little bit. I mean, there's so many directions we could go, but maybe you could go into a little bit about having a bit of longevity in one of these gardens because, as you say, it's always evolving, it's changing. There is a certain layer of succession. How are you trying to make sure that that garden looks good long term and provides and functions in the way that you want it to?
One of the big learning curves for a designer is to realize that a good designer doesn't design what they want. They design a solution for what the client or the space needs.
Mm,
And sometimes that means putting your desires aside and becoming very humble and opening your eyes not to look through the lens of what you would like to see there or aspire to see there, but to read the landscape, to
mm,
read the ecology, to read the soil. And until you can put your hand on the soil and just feel not its condition, but where it's going. Because remember, nothing in nature is static.
hmm.
A grassland is only experienced as a grassland for a certain period of time, and then it becomes scrub, and the scrub becomes woodland, the woodland becomes
Yes.
closed woodland, becomes rainforest, etc. And then it goes backwards because nature doesn't have a mind of progression or gain or loss.
Mm.
So when it's time and the trees die, they absorbed, and it's not de-evolution, it's just shifts. And it kills the whole forest off and it reverts back to open woodland or then scrubland or to grassland. And it's all resource movement.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what we have in today's society is a capitalist machine, and that's natural. We build cities, we build houses, we pour money into it, we work for it. And you grow veggies to save you money or to produce wonderful food for you to eat. And there's like an ownership, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
Nature doesn't have that. So we've got to work with clients, in my mind, and with other designers in terms of education and lecturing, etc., to shift our consciousness from that to understanding that the land is moving.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to grow vegetables, you've got to look at your site and say, okay, what kind of habitat or ecology have I got here? I've got open soils, it's bare, it's exposed, there's lots of wind, lots of sun. It's probably a bacterial-based soil ecology. Look at the weeds, it's grasses, it's primary colonizers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, these ones move quickly. They're really rapid nutrient cyclists. Okay, so if I want to try plant a jaboticaba or a rainforest tree from Brazil or Australia,
Yeah.
I've got to create an environment that's suitable for that. But what if I stop thinking about the tree as a product and I think, okay, this is where I'm starting at, base soil. All right, let's plug into what nature's trying to do. And you start adding lemongrass, different grass species. You fill it up, densely planted with bioaccumulators that like high exposures in bacterial-based ecologies. And you harvest, if you're really clever, you make more edibles and herbs, and you feed your family out of it, and you cut and chop and drop, and you cut and chop and drop, and you let the seeds spread, and you go to town on it. And you just, with a little bit of patience, look and read, and you observe your soil opening up a little bit. So you let the weeds come in with a deep taproot.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you see the weed, nature isn't just telling you what the ecology wants, it's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
By the time the seeds germinated and you see it, you're way behind the start point. That race has started. Nature is saying, the soil is compacted, it's dry, it's bacterial. This weed's going to come up and I'm aerating, I'm opening it up, I'm bioaccumulating and drawing nutrients and carbon dioxide down into the soil. So plug into that, start planting more, start planting more, start planting more. And then in time, you can change the nature of your soils and increase organic matter. And then you say, okay, it's 50-50 fungal bacteria. Maybe I'll introduce brassicas and maybe I'll put a carrot in there. And, then I'll play around with these. And slowly that's the magic of humans, is we move through multiple ecologies. We're not like a tree that is there and has to outlast for a long time. We can actually transition. We can be agents of change. And you can supercharge those processes. And you can slowly but surely, at the rate of your soil changes, you can change all the vegetation, because everything that's above is just an expression of what's happening underneath. So you shouldn't, in theory, make your garden based upon what's above. You should start under and emerge out of the soil, because that's a long-lasting investment of putting currency where it will stay, where chop and drop vegetation is cheap currency.
Mm-hmm.
That cents, what you put in the dollar is your paper notes, your big currency.
Yeah.
And so they feed off each other. And that's the thought. But to get there, we have to talk to designers and urban planners and architects and talk to them about creating environments that are capable of hosting succession and change. And that changes our mentality about what we see when we look at a parkland. When you look at the bush, everyone thinks they're trees and that's the bush. That's the bush that's going through a dynamic change responding to humans. And the trees are trying to compete with the carbon dioxide and gas and the methane and this and that. And that's fine. But we need to plug into those processes. So did that answer your question? Or have I gone on a tangent?
No. That's really good. But I'll bring it because I like the idea of the design on the structure, and like something like a parkland where, as you say, you can somewhat guide it towards this evolution. So you're starting with certain species that are going to thrive in whatever expression the soil is showing you at that time, so that you're going to get something really beautiful and livable, or whatever the case may be. But you're also thinking, okay, so that's moving the whole expression towards this kind of ecological change, or it's going to want to bring in more of these types of species eventually, and you're sort of guiding it a certain way. In a parkland or something, that to me seems like it would be a lot easier than, say, a rooftop cityscape type garden where you're presumably, I mean, bringing in or creating soil in these instances. They're not attached to the ground, so you're not part of the earth itself. But it does, and it has presumably a different environment up on the roof. So, how are you, how are you thinking about a place to start? And are you going through that same process of evolution in a rooftop?
Absolutely. So we look at what kind of ecology the host environment can sustain. And if it's a roof garden, the engineers and the architects dictate that to us. How much weight? What is the saturated weight? What's the thickness of substrate? If you change it from a podding mix, which will be very light, that'll become sour and age in time, and anything you planted there needs it removed and refreshed. So to make a roof garden long term or sustainable long term, it can't have those disturbance events. You can't refresh it.
No.
It needs to be a solid structure like soils, and then your ecologies are the thing that unfold on that currency of stability. So what we do is some companies would bring in organic mixes, and so I'll add, X amount of compost, and we'll have decomposted pine bark, which can last for 3-5 years, and it's very lightweight, but that'll sour in time. We need to talk about 60, 100 years, the lifespan of building. So where do you find that? You go to scree, you go to the side of mountains where mountains and cliff faces are eroding, and you get buildup of aggregates and soils that are in mineral form that can survive for tens of thousands of years. And you look at the ecologies that survive in there with only this much soil. But then you've got to look at where your climate is, where your project is, and you've got to find your temperate version, subtropical, your tropical version, your coastal, your inland, your desert, your this, your alpine. And you find analogs within those environments, and that gives you the global macro framework. And then you zoom in down, you say, okay, it's classic permaculture. Don't try to make a tropical rainforest in the middle of the desert, because you're going to have to pump in a lot of resources. It's unsustainable. If you're going to get snowed in, that's not going to work. So you look at your altitude bands, and for vertical gardens, it's really interesting because we can have a building that's 100 stories high, and you've got a different climatic belt with each 30-meter increment you go up. So you might have a skyscraper in Brisbane that on the 100th floor, it's the equivalent of Melbourne's climate.
Wow.
And then you find a mountain that has that altitude, and you look at those bands, and you can find which species are doing well in that band. And then you can drill into the rainforest or the forest on the side of it, and you can look at those plants which are in the core of the protected canopy, those which are in that canopy, those which are on the outside edge that have higher exposures. And you start reading these ecologies, and you're mapping and putting them together. Now, that takes a lot of experience, but you don't have to do it to that degree. I have to, because I have to survive 150-year life. Storm events, etc. But nature's got all those answers. And so our roof gardens became 80% mineral mixes that would last for ages. And then we had to investigate, how do we increase organics in it and create healthy environments? And that's what we've been doing for 20 or 30 years. And you can apply that to your garden. What kind of soil have I got? How do I build upon it? Etc. Same thing.
I love that thought, because you are essentially visiting various different ecological systems that are already showing you how it's done. So it's not necessarily trying to, like you say, reinvent the wheel. You're just going and taking from what's there. And it made me think of, I've seen quite often in the middle of seemingly a concrete landscape. You've got these tiny little cracks or really small deposits of soil or residue or something, and then there's these plants that are able to come out of it, and their roots are just kind of going and wrapping around, and they're somewhat healthy and like they're able to survive in these conditions. And you think, how is that able to do that in that situation? And then at home, I've got a vast, healthy living soil, and I can't get the same thing to grow there. But it's seeing how those systems are working and then replicating those.
Mm,
And
mm, mm,
I
mm,
imagine that the thought of trying to make something last 100 years is an incredibly daunting, but also probably rewarding challenge to try and come up
mm,
with.
mm.
Uh, you're obviously trying to, like, I imagine you're not picking one or a few species of plants that's going to last those 100 years. You're talking succession as well, right? So initially, when you're planting something, you might have it much more exposed, and you might want to develop, like you say, these grasses or succulents or cacti species that are really used to having to hold and conserve that water and et cetera, until it develops and you can start bringing in some more species that are then going to be able to last once there's more vegetation or vice versa. Is that the sort of thought you're trying to progress species as well as the soil?
Absolutely, because plants are agents of change. They're not there to stay. They're there
Yeah.
to colonize and live and express their lives, and that means movement.
Mm,
Plants just move at a different time scale to us. That's all. And we've got to adjust our mentality of looking at something and saying that picture, that framework, is what it is.
yeah.
It isn't. It's a snapshot in a movie with where it's going and all the frames are just parallel. But like a fly probably lives for 3 days, it might experience reality on the same level as us, just compacted
Mm,
into dense living. And that's probably the difference between us and plants. And you're totally right. I might select a species that is known to be long lived, that can last 100 years, but I can't design a monoculture out of just
mm,
them. I then
mm.
have to mix that with a second line plant that can survive for 10 years. But if it dies, I need to think about, can it reproduce? Does it have rhizomes? Is it stoloniferous? Can the mother plant die, but it
Yeah.
emerges elsewhere? And if that doesn't work, what's the next coping mechanism? Does it produce a seed bank?
Hmm.
Um, are there surrounding ecologies where I can capitalize on spontaneous colonization by weeds? I'm really excited about that. I don't use it because it's just one of those things that maintenance teams that follow after the designs might be able to look into and explore. But I do follow maintenance for decades after installations. And so the idea is you try to represent a diverse, dynamic, ecological approach to design, and you would have all your different layers and species represented so that if you have a stress, for example, the wind blows through, if you've just got one strong species, it's got to handle the wind. But if you put a slightly smaller tussock next to that shrub, it spreads the wind load over them. If you put a smaller one in front of that, it spreads it more and it creates a
Mm,
micro habitat. But also in the, the windward and the leeward side where the turbulence occurs, that's naturally where you find long spin-off tails of germinating short-term species. And if you have a look
mm,
at sand dunes and deserts, you'll see these long curves, beautiful curves. And that's where the seed collects. And it
yeah.
lifts in the wind, but when it hits a shrub, the turbulence causes it to deposit. And that's where organics and leaves collect. And then that's where moisture collects and then germination occurs. And so you've got these colonizing tendencies. And
Yeah.
part of my job would be studying the edge effect of a building and a curve and a ballast area, and then figuring out which way the prevalent wind and rain are the rain shadows. And then I plant species and zone them. So I might have 10% are short-lived colonizing plants, 20% are long-term, and I try to represent them according to what I think the client and the host building can tolerate or be interested in exploring.
Yeah.
And we
That's
radiate out from that.
wow. I didn't realize so much thought went into it, but I can appreciate that it's necessary. And one thing that I'm thinking about is would be so important in this, and as it is in permaculture and any kind of land that you're trying to cultivate or work on, you you need to observe what happens in that land ecosystem, presumably over a somewhat lengthy period of time. I know that most people that when they first come to a property, if we're talking they want to design sort of a permaculture style property or land, they want to observe where the wind pockets are, where the moisture is accumulating, the lay of the land, and where the sun hits it, and all of these types of things. I imagine that when you're doing consultation and trying to work with some of these people that are wanting this, whether it's on top of a building or it's in a permaculture agriculture situation, how much data are you trying to gather on the ecosystem itself, and how, over what time span are you trying to gather this and have a look at it? Or is it a matter of trial and error in some instances?
Mm. Well, there are certain vital statistics that are quite simple to gather. You can look at what's your average rainfall, your mean temperature, your maximums and your minimums to know the outlying extremes.
Mm-hmm.
You can figure out with a simple Google search what is the highest rainfall event ever recorded in that particular area.
Right.
Then you go out and you analyze the soil. You see what's there. You look at the ecology. You walk silently through the site and get a feeling for where it's at and what it's doing. Has it been severely impacted by human intentions, or has it been left? Is there erosion, et cetera, Are there resources available that are already there? And these are things that you can quite quickly put together.
Mm-hmm.
Then you speak to the client and you apply that same process to their thought patterns. Our minds are very busy,
Yes.
and the noise comes and the chatters in so many levels. I love color. I want change. I moved into this. I've got horses and pigs. Can you use plants I've already got? My husband has different needs to me. I've got kids. We might have kids. We might not. The place has to evolve with us. I've got a new job and things are going to change. And you listen to this scattering and smattering of lots of change, and you try to find what lies at the core of a person. Where are they really going? What are the long-lasting things that will last? And then what are the slightly less, it's like zoning in permacultural zoning. Zone 0 is the home,
Yes.
the heart, and what people really want. And often they don't know that because it's hidden in the layers. So trying to learn about a client, and then you've got your zone 1, which are thoughts they quickly go to on a daily basis and seem to be a habit. And you go to zone 2 and 3 and 4. The further out you go are the more outlying random ideas that they often started the conversation with.
Yeah.
The greatest excitement is what is the fashion of the day. And I've just sold my property in Melbourne and I bought acreage in Brisbane and I've only lived in a unit, but now I've got 10 acres and I want everything. I just want it all. It's so exciting.
That sounds like me.
It sounds like
me
too.
Yeah.
So it's that filtering process, and it depends on your time. In commercial reality, is you've got a very tight budget. People don't like talking too long. They want everything handed on a platter. My client for living architecture is interested in plants, but they actually want the vertical garden or the roof garden because it saves them $200,000 a year in air conditioning.
Wow.
Okay, so that's your starting point. You realize that, okay, we've got to engineer this thought process. And that's where there's a whole designer's journey embedded into it. But once you meet like-minded people, you can hit the ground running and you can sense what's happening. And once you've got a feeling for what the land can support, then talking to the clients, you can say, I hear you. That thought process is great, but you're probably going to need 6 hours a week or 2 hours a week or 5 hours a week to maintain it. Can you handle that? Is it in the lifestyle you want? Okay, well, this soil is very degraded, so it's going to need 2 or 3 times the amount of work that you initially would need. But that section over there has good organic content. It's a bit sheltered, and you can achieve the same level after 2 or 3 years with half the inputs. Would you want to start on the easier side, or do you want to hit the hard one quickly?
Yeah.
And so as the designer, you've also got to be the psychologist that helps to zone it all. It's quite
Yeah.
exciting, but it takes a certain mindset and
I
personality.
imagine it does. And then you're having to kind of read between the lines of where, as you say, what people are most excitedly talking about and something that they've heard or seen, or I want this as well in my property or on my building. And you've got to almost be the realist to the dreamer in some stages and sort of say, look, this is kind of what's realistic. But then again, some of the, as you say, some of these things that you can achieve, but they just might take a little bit more work. So you're just having to be, let them know,
Mm,
are you aware of this? And
yeah.
this could be a lot more effort to get there. And sometimes they probably want to do that, but you never know,
Yeah.
do you? Yeah.
Or they might want to do it in stages. And
Mm,
the wonderful thing about permaculture and working with natural systems is everything is actually achievable.
it
You
is.
just need to decide what your priorities are and where you want to go with it. You know, everyone wants this syntropic agroforestry scenario because it's so exciting and there's so much happening at the same time. But are you capable of climbing a 6 meter tree and harvesting timber if that's part of your process? If it is, we've got a long way of a lot of adventures we can apply. But you can then scale that down and your tree could be pigeon pea.
Yes.
It's the
Yes.
same ecology, just scaled down and changed in different ways and adapted. And that's where an efficiency arises from lived experience and exposure to a wide range of options.
Yeah.
And that's where it helps. You know, you can take a degraded soil and you can supercharge it slowly and steadily, but
hmm
you could do it 10 times faster if you know what it is. What is life? Is
Yeah.
it the organics? Is it the bacteria? Is it the plants? Is it the roots,
That's right.
etc.?
Yeah, because if you, as you said earlier about a, say, like a bacterial rich soil, if you understand that that's what the soil is, then you can work really hard to bringing back that fungal to bacteria ratio or changing it towards something else that you might want. But if you're unaware of that, or even if you don't want to go so hard into it, you can just allow for that natural progression and that change to happen over time.
Mm,
For
mm,
instance,
mm,
in my
mm,
case, I'm trying to transform this 30 square meter area in the front of our property, and it's right by the main road, so there's not a hugely amazing part, but the it was just bare lawn, and
mm,
I guess I resonate very much with that excitement of going, oh, I've got this space, I can now convert it into this, etc., etc. But I'm very quickly realizing and reining myself in and saying, look, you've got a long way to go to transform this into a thriving, productive place that you want it to be. And I'm trying to work out exactly what I'm dealing with currently, what's working well through experimentation, and what doesn't and does work. And I'm trying to really bring a slow, healthy approach to how I'm tackling this.
mm, mm,
So
mm,
if I say, for example, you were to have me as a client in this instance, where I'm coming in, and we can make this relevant to everybody. If it's a brand new property or it's a, any kind of space that someone's wanting to transform and they've got all these big dreams and things, before you or without needing to understand where they want to go with it, say they're pretty open with it and they don't really mind. What are some of the things that you're first looking at as your priorities to kind of going, this is what this space can handle, or with those first considerations? I'm thinking sunlight, rainfall, etc. Can you go into a few of those things for us?
Everything we do is an application of a technology. A thought is a technology, a plant is a technology, analysis is a technology, and they're all very useful, but they all take you on a tangent.
Mm,
If you need to understand the goal, like what do you want? We could take this land and this water and we can develop a billabong habitat. We could
yeah.
look at the surrounding bushland and see what do we need to do to this land to provide the greatest benefit to the bushland? Or we
Mm.
could look at it and say, how do we feed a family from this? Or you've got cows and horses. Are they the highest priority? Well, then let's structure that to that. Or you're trying to create a community. Well, we can design this entire space and look at all the resources in here that draw people in
Mm.
or push people out.
Yes.
We can take plants, and I tell this to clients all the time. I can use all these plants to create a self-sustaining ecology, but I can also structure these plants to kill all of themselves. Because syntropy and entropy
Mm.
are like yin and yang. They're part of each other. And you
Yes.
feed off death to create birth, and you need
Yes.
birth to create death. And the death is the currency that feeds the system, but the system only works through mixing all of those resources. So it really is resource management.
Yeah.
And humans are uniquely positioned that we can firstly take someone else's heart and put it in someone else's body.
Yeah.
Then we can put them in a spacesuit and shoot them to the moon, and then we can start a farm there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we're clever enough, we can put plants up there that self-replicate, that do the job in autopilot for us, and then we can bring babies in,
Mm.
you know?
That's so incredible. You're right. And
Yeah.
so these are all technologies, and what you're essentially saying is that it's not necessarily the the particular resources or the things that we're looking at that matter. It's where you want to take it because all of these things are, as you say, probably possible. It just depends on how much effort and how long we're talking.
Mm. Yes, yes. A
Th-
client won't maintain something you've designed if their heart isn't in it, or they don't
mm,
recognize part of themselves in it, or if it's not interwoven into their life story, because then it's not integrated.
that's
It's
such an important
beautiful
point.
and it's
Yeah.
perfect, but you can have many cogs in a machine, but unless they align and they drive each other, they just make noise and they grind each other. So you
I
need the
love that
person
thought.
and the landscape to be driving each other and feeding back, and the waste comes back and the energy comes back. And what gets a person out of bed in the morning to sit and turn a compost heap and to plant a seedling and to water or to chop and drop is the fuel they get from doing it that
Mm,
ignites the flame in them, that makes them feel I'm part of the land. And that is where we go back to the beginning of our conversation. I say, I learned that as a human being, I'm not imposing myself, I am imposing myself on it, but I'm part of the habitat. My home is my home, but it's my home habitat.
yes.
And it overflows to my neighbors. And any workshops I do probably have to be free of charge to my neighbors so that I can pull them in and then they can go out and it's planting seeds. But the further out I go, I need them to bring resources with them because I'm not covering a bigger area. And they're going to have to pay
Yes.
for my time and my energy, but I can provide seedlings. And then they
Mm,
come back with cuttings. And then you get this economy of cumulative interest that is self-generating within your garden. And it's one of the few things in the world that can generate compound interest. And that's
I,
plant-based, ecological-based system.
yeah. You're right. And that's such a beautifully put analogy, how it needs to be integrated because it's all good wanting a space that is beautiful or you can be proud of and you want all of your friends to come around and see this wonderful space and look what I'm doing, etc. But if you're not living and breathing that, it very quickly doesn't work for
Mm.
whatever reason because you're not in there and living it, so to speak. And often initially I was helping a lot of people with I guess, general garden maintenance and uh, trying to help them think about their gardens in terms of how we can get what they want in there. And it resonates when you say we need to understand the difference between what they want and what's possible and what's realistic. Because often someone will go to town and they'll fill up their garden full of all of these plants that look wonderful and whatever. And then a year or two down the track, it's an incredible amount of maintenance that they're not willing to be doing. And then it doesn't work for them and the whole system breaks down.
mm,
So it
mm,
needs to be this, as you say, this pull for you to go and be a part of the system and play your role in it as well
mm,
as part of the, I often call humans the greatest pollinators because we're able to, go around and spread species and share things and have our ability on the earth. And I absolutely love that, building this kind of economy where you can share and cause that ripple effect where you're influencing the ones around you and bringing them into your ecosystem and showing them how you can thrive, and then that is spreading throughout your community and things
mm,
like that.
mm,
It's
absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
certainly what you did for me when we first met and you started speaking about all of these things. I was just immediately drawn to how thoughtful you were about these systems and these types of things. Can you talk to me a little bit more now? If we're going to be going towards, let's say, a permaculture style thinking, because it's tended to become a bit of a buzzword in modern gardening and this permaculture resurgence that we're seeing, where everybody's very excited by having a food forest or whatever it might be. What are some, let's use the word technologies. What are some technologies that are either misunderstood, underappreciated, or overvalued in a way? Like in terms of what are some things that people are putting all their eggs in that basket when it's not very necessary, and what are some things that we're missing out on in thinking
Mm,
about permaculture where we could
mm, mm.
maybe include that a little bit more?
Perma plants and gardens are a small portion of permaculture.
Mm,
Permaculture is about human need and about integrating human need with what the earth is and how it works. So permaculture also goes to road construction and dam construction and property development and social need, psychological need. Does religion play a part in it? Permaculture tries not to be religious, but it has to acknowledge that if someone comes to you from one part of the world, their sets of needs and wants will
mm,
be culturally different to another set. And what's acceptable in one area and exciting in one area could be a terrible sink. And a great example is a wealthy Western person looking at an interview with an African farmer and saying, this is so easy. They need to create compost tea, make heaps of compost, put it down there, have chickens, do this and do that, plant all their guilds, make their swales and everything's good. But what that farm is trying to do is simply get today's food on the table for 4 kids.
mm.
There isn't a spade. They're going through drought, and their neighbors come through and eat their produce, and so do the goats.
Yeah.
So their reality is so dramatically different to us. But the
Hmm.
wonderful thing about permaculture is it speaks directly to needs. And so when COVID hit, a lot of people had a life crisis where, firstly, they were marooned at home and they had to deal with themselves. And some people thrived and some people didn't, depending on their background and their upbringing and their current way of living. And permaculture asks the question, what do you need? And then it asks, what do you want? And then it asks, what is there? And then it asks, how do you want to prioritize doing it? And
Mm.
everything is needed, but not everything is wanted, but not everything's needed. So there's humility as a permaculture designer or an ecological designer to question themselves before they get involved in design.
Mhm.
And it's to humble yourself before the landscape and the people and let them be your teachers. And then you use your skill and hopefully your knowledge to help the client to understand what they're actually asking.
Yeah.
And often it involves what they're not asking because they don't know. And it's the same with vegetable gardens. So That's a really good question because you can answer it by saying what sits in front of you, but you can also answer it by saying what isn't asked.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it. A lot of us have a space and we use social media to introduce ourselves to concepts and ideas. And a lot of social media paints a picture of the successes and the beautiful frames that the photos take and the videos. But the honesty is the person with sweat in the garden with a hoe, digging a swale, planting a plant, making a compost heap out of plants that died,
Yeah.
which is me. I've got some of the most expensive compost you've ever seen. And the thing is, it changes your mindset that
Mm,
you can't think capitalistic. You can think capitalistically, and you can explore them, and you can celebrate them.
mhm.
But all your losses are compost, and your
Yeah.
compost feeds your next thoughts.
Yes.
And your failures are information gathering that's teaching you as to what's going on. And your weed that you hate is telling you a story about what the soil needs, and it's all efficiencies.
Yeah.
Um, the first question, really, before you do anything, is to try and honestly sit down and ask, do I understand the difference between what I want and what I need? And do I understand the difference between what the land needs and what I want? And then thirdly, do I understand how to achieve it efficiently without wasting resources? And all of those are flexible,
Yeah.
and all of them will involve losses and failures, and all of them will be a growth response. And they'll probably all of them set you free just by take your shoes off, walk through your land, feel the soil and the mud and the squelch and the pain and the weeds and the whatever.
Yes.
Get your hand into the soil, smell it, taste it, and start learning that you're in it. And then you've
That's
got a really powerful start to the process.
You do, and that's the way you say that you need to be somewhat of a psychologist is really becoming clear because you're one primarily that first point is helping to people understand or look inside and hold up a bit of a mirror for them to say, what is it that you're actually wanting here? What are you trying to achieve?
Mm,
And
mm, mm,
whether it's, oh, I've just seen all of these fabulous gardens on Instagram and I want that too, so I can, whether it's have something to show to my friends or whatever it is, or whether it's this deep yearning for connection back to nature or a spiritual journey of some sort,
mm,
you're really trying to provoke those questions.
mm,
Now,
mm, mm.
how this might be a difficult question as well, but I'm loving the way this conversation is going. How do you get somebody to think about those things? Or what are some of the things that you can ask yourself if you're in that position? Because for myself, in this instance, with this front garden, I want a place to educate and I want a place to integrate. So I have moved all of my things that I want into this one space, and this is where I'm going to be working from and teaching from and spending my time where I get to go and decompress from everyday life out there. So
Mm,
the my thoughts are going, I would like to educate on the things that I think are important. Primarily for me, that's soil health and the ability to restore health to and vitality to the land and the space. But that for me, I'm still thinking I don't know which direction that could take, and I'm quite open to which direction it could take. But what are you trying to get people to think about in that instance? How are you getting them to think, what is it that I want, but what do I need that I don't know that I need?
Yeah, life is weird because you discover who you are trying to be retrospectively.
Yes,
And there is
yes.
technically no you. It's once again, it's that picture in a frame in a movie. There is no you. The moment you lock onto what you need and what you want, that frame's moved and you're a different person.
Mm,
Tomorrow
mhm.
you've got a different budget. The car breaks down. You have a
Yeah.
baby. You have family. It starts raining. The seasons change. The days change. you get introduced to a new exciting concept and you revamp everything that came before. You've adjusted. What I try to do, because as you can ascertain, my brain does not stop. It's
I
and
love
so is
it.
my heart. I'm
I
feeling,
relate. I relate.
yes. Is when we bought our property here, for a full year, I did not buy a single plant.
How?
And I pulled, I'll tell you retrospectively that I did it by pulling a chair out or sitting on the balcony and watching.
hmm
And I
hmm
realized my resources are limited. And the more efficient I'm going to do with this, the more honest I have to be. I don't have time, and I don't have, by resources, I mean time,
hmm
and I mean dollars,
Yes.
but, and energy. I'm started late with the family. I'm getting close to 50. I had a kid at, my 40s, etc., etc. So I'm a dedicated dad, and I've got X amount of time for gardening.
hmm
But I thought I have to be more honest, and I have to be more efficient with everything. And the way to do that is to really look at what have I got? What is here? What's already here?
Yeah.
And to separate, do I want to do that? Do I need to do it? And do I actually really need to do that?
Yeah.
If that soil is compact, do I need to go out there now and fork it over or plant a cover crop or do anything? Or can I just mulch it and
Yeah.
then focus on that soil first? Can I get a better crop out of that quickly? And beauty is a resource,
hmm
and traffic noise is an issue. So, do I get my hedge in first? How do I prioritize what I want to do? So, sitting and watching and observing is probably one of the most powerful things, because you can sit and worry. There's a lot of people with environmental anxiety out there,
Yes.
and a lot of people that are panicking because they want to get the perfect things done in their garden right, and they don't want to be a failure. But if you sit and watch, sometimes your worries or the problems actually blow away,
Yeah.
or the rain softens the soil while you're freaking out. And you realize
Yeah.
I've been sitting looking at hard, compact soil because it's bone dry, freaking out, and then the rain comes and it's softened. And you go, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I didn't even think of that as an option. You know, for
So
me, it
true.
was my food forest. I
hmm
planted sweet potato as an aggressive ground cover to cover and suppress the weeds, because while it was producing tubers, it was tilling.
Yeah.
And then we ate all the leaves. I didn't eat the tubers because the rats came in, and we realized that the leaves were more nutritious than the tubers in any case.
Yeah.
But then I was chopping and dropping, chopping and dropping. I was building organics, and then I started planting trees between it and using a weed
Mm.
as a nurse species. And so my viewing of the world and what I needed changed as I was sitting there watching. And some of the things I never got around to doing it, and they did self-resolve, but I didn't need to prioritize them as highly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that too. The retrospective thought of what's meaningful at the time, you don't get to see that until afterwards, or what you're spending your time worrying on, or as you say, things every day or every situation, your meaning, your purpose, your likes, dislikes, interests are all evolving. And
Mm, mm,
you mentioned about showing up as a father and being,
mm,
that's an amazingly crucial role that you play. And my wife and I are having our child in a matter of days or weeks, our first child. So it's very relevant that for me that my whole purpose is about to shift towards caring for another life and bringing them up and integrating them into this wonderful world. So my time is
mm,
going to change. The amount
mm,
of effort that I can put into all of my endeavors is going to change. And how can I then best take what I have and make the or make it flourish the most?
mm,
And I have limited resources, I have limited time and energy, and I want to give my all to every situation. And I find myself with a list that keeps growing, Eric. It keeps getting bigger and bigger of all these amazing things that I want to do. And the priorities, though, on there are always shifting. And it's something where it's okay, this seemed very important before, and not so much now. And initially, a lot of my drive was to help people understand the basics of good nutrition from the food that you grow yourself compared to our vastly monocropped agricultures, et cetera, our big food chain. So trying to separate people's thinking from relying so much on that system and being able to understand that they can grow healthy food at home. Now, that's evolved because not only does it not necessarily matter to me as much anymore for different reasons, one being that I don't actually eat all that many vegetables, if I'm honest. I'm quite a heavy carnivore, which I don't often talk about. But it's also my shift has become more towards understanding the soil health and, as you say, the natural cycles and trying to tap into what's already there, read the land, and understand what can I then get out of that that I can educate people on, bringing more of a connection back, a community connection as well. This is a lot of the reason why I like to do this type of podcast, dive into people's stories, meet people, connect people, share information. It's a lot of what I love to do. So it's evolved from me from that initial necessity of going, I really want people to eat well and understand that where their food comes from and not have pesticides, etc., to then going, actually, this is bigger than that. This is more a connection to everything and each other and life itself.
Mm.
So that's
Mm.
leading me off into all these different journeys. And then obviously with a child on the way, it's like, how do I then inspire the next generation? Something I think you brought your son along, wasn't it? When you were first, and he comes along to certain things, and I think he was there that time when I first met you, and I loved that he was there, and that you're bringing, your family along into this journey and showing them the appreciation and these
Mm.
types of things, because
Mm.
that
Mm.
is missing. That conversation about integration and living within the cycles is missing. So if you had to, if you had to kind of talk about for you as a father figure and the way in which you're demonstrating and teaching your son, isn't it? That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
And have you just got one son? Is that
just
right?
one. Yeah.
Yeah. How have you approached that, and how
Mm.
has that changed over
Mm.
the
Mm.
upbringing of your
Mm.
son?
You've touched on so many core things. I think it's important to acknowledge that your expectations should suit your lifestyle, and
Mm.
your lifestyle changes, therefore you need flexibility. And sometimes we engage in things wanting a certain outcome and then realize that it was actually the process of engaging that was what we needed, not necessarily the thing. For some
Yes.
people, gardening is a thing,
Mm.
and they turn to it because it feels wholesome. They get good vibes from it. They know they can be productive. They're working with a system they know that they can get a response from. It's not a dead tile. You've got to paint the tile. If you leave the tile in the garage, it's just going to collect dust. But if you plant a seed, it's going to do stuff while you're
Mm.
engaged elsewhere. And you come back and you go, oh, that was
Yeah.
my mastery. Check it out. Look at my chilies.
Yeah.
And then you have a child, and then you can go very esoteric with this, but I'm a very pragmatic, scientifically driven person. I'm very spiritual because I understand there's so much out there that I just can't fathom.
Hmm.
So I've got this big box of I don't understand. It's too big for me, but I respect it, and it's there.
Yes.
And my son is my teacher. He wasn't born with all the degrees I've got and with the life experience that I can see, but he's born without the BS that I've
Yes.
accumulated. So he doesn't have these onion layers of expectation and hurt and learning and gain and wonder and all of these things, obligation, etc.
Hmm.
He sees it and he says it. And I go,
Mm.
oh, you've got to laugh as a parent because your kids are going to show the, the skeletons in the closet very quickly. So you learn how to water off a duck's back.
Yes.
You learn to sit and watch and learn. And I, just like I said, that skill of watching, not looking, but seeing.
Mm.
not just talking, but learning how to imbue your words with deep meaning and value takes quietness, and it takes humility, and it takes understanding that they were probably all built on losses and figuring things out. And
Yes.
that's cool. But your children will teach you because they will mirror all of your vulnerabilities, and your garden will throw back in your face all your expectations, because it will say, I won't be caged by you.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a hedge trimmer and you want square hedges. That's cool. Trim me and turn your back on me. And I've got my own agenda. And I don't speak your language. I don't have your expectations and your beliefs. I'm going to set seed, and I'm going to send roots down. I'm going to grow however my genetics wants me to, and which
Yes.
way the sun angle is and all of that. So if you learn the currency or the language of the things you're working with, then you're 3/4 of the way there.
Mm.
The next thing that really struck me was, it's that old saying, perfection doesn't exist. It recreates itself and will totally mess you up. It's progress.
Yes.
Perfection is in like the end of the rainbow perfection.
Mm.
It doesn't work like that. The more effort you put in does not create perfection. And the cleaner your edges and your lines, and the better integrated and smarter you are, the more you learn,
Yeah.
the less you'll ever know. So true wisdom isn't gaining knowledge. It's actually letting go of knowledge and realizing I humble myself, but I acknowledge that I'm getting very clever, but I've got to watch what I'm doing, because it comes with responsibilities and it changes them.
Mm.
And so the way I survived parenting and expectation and being efficient and gardening was the progress rather than perfection. And my wife taught me that, because I've been wanting to do workshops and teach and share what we're doing here at our homestead, United Natures. And I've been holding myself back and procrastinating. She said, just do it. And I said, what are you talking about? I've got a level of expectation and perfection. I've got all this experience. And she set up her macrame business, and she just does it. And it's
Yeah.
amazing how she's growing. And she said, Erik, people don't want to see the end product. They want to see the guts of
Mm.
how it works. They want to see your wicking bed not made yet. They want to see your compost halfway through. They want to see your veggie patch straight after harvesting. They want to see you mulching the bare soil, because that's where the learning is. It's not this veneer of completedness, because that's not reality.
Yes.
And it's this huge cycle. It's quite wonderful. And nature will do that, because you will have an idea of what you want with your garden, but what your garden is never a finished product, because technically your finished product should be in your belly.
Yeah.
It's still not in the soil.
Yeah.
That's progress.
You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. There's some profound wisdom there, Erik. Thank you. And
Mm.
you're right, because and sharing the transformation myself of the front garden is a big part of sharing that authenticity. And I think your wife's hit the nail on the head there about showing what the journey is. And often we like to watch our really successful people in the world, how they got there. And, if you got to see in Steve Jobs's office when he was first building the company, you'd be really interested to see how the thought patterns were going in and how the challenges were managed and all of these problems were being thought out. And it's not necessarily, yes, here's the picture, perfect end goal. And then everyone goes, well, how do I get to that? And it's more a matter of come along for the journey with me and see how we're getting to that. See how we're working against and with certain problems and how you
Mm.
can then transform it and what rewarding process that is,
Mm.
both for me and for somebody else watching.
Mm. Mm.
And
Mm.
that
Can I
authentic,
just quickly add within
yeah,
that thought?
please.
So, is you touched on it that like me, you've got this goal of what you want to do, but maybe permaculture is teaching us that no individual does everything. It's
Mm,
community. So
yes.
if you've got a goal, break it down into steps. And do you have to do all the steps yourself? Can you
Yeah,
integrate
yeah.
people, bring the talent in, bring the labor in, bring the new ideas, bring the young energy in, bring the old wisdom in, and just sometimes we're a facilitator less than a solution maker, but we host it. And
Mm,
that could be genius in and of itself as well.
that's a very good point because you're bringing, I, you know, you might find this as well. I find because nature is, quote unquote perfect in its way of doing things, I feel like I am more of a facilitator and I'm disseminating information from so many wonderful people that I've learnt from and who have learnt from the natural systems themselves. I'm just disseminating that information in my own authentic way. I'm not necessarily reinventing or coming up with anything. It's just trying to put it into a perspective of how I see it and how that might be able to help other people. So I'm
Mm,
not necessarily
mm,
going out there doing anything special. And you're right. I'm using community. I'm using somebody like I might steal a quote that you've used today and share that with somebody else and say, Eric told me this. It was wonderful. It really changed my mind. And then that ripple effects into other people. And you're right. It takes a village to raise a child, doesn't it? So it's taking this diversity of people and thought and experience, cultural background, and bringing it all together in trying to create something wonderful and flourish.
mm.
So
Everything I say, you're welcome to have.
I really
Okay.
appreciate that. I'll do well to remember it all, Eric, and I'll do well to be able to say it in the same beautiful way
Yeah.
that you have. But
Uh, yeah. Everything I'm saying is what I've learned from others.
yeah, and that's
Mm,
something I'm trying to embrace and
mm,
like putting yourself out there as I do daily and weekly and say, I'm here to share the information, to give you some answers and to try and help problem solve for you. I'm very aware that I don't know everything.
mm,
And the battle between me wanting to come across as somewhat of a teacher figure,
mm, mm,
a maestro, or
mm,
whatever it might be,
mm,
versus my humbling lack of knowledge and lack of experience. This fine balance of trying to be that person that people can look to for that information versus saying, "Hey, I'm exactly like you and we're all just learning." It's a very fine balance. But I've come to realize that coming out there with the intention to learn and having people see that authentic intention to learn and grow with the space, grow with the community, that's what people are looking for more so.
I think you're absolutely right. I think people want knowledge and they sometimes don't recognize knowledge or they're talking about subjects that they're passionate about. It's the connection they want.
Mm.
The
Hmm.
answers often come with the air of progress that accompanies someone. It's not the answers that they provide. It's okay, here we are. If you want to be resilient, you don't have to be knowledgeable. You've got to be flexible.
Mm.
You can't measure flexibility. You've got to test it.
Yes, yes. Very, very
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
Very, very true.
And it ties in with everything you're talking about. We're talking about biochar and wood vinegar and everything I do and design with and apply, I'm happy to drop and not use again in an instant. If
Mm.
something presents itself that is integrated better or works better or feels better, is more holistic, then I'll go with that. And
Mm.
that includes, ooh, can I even say that? That includes my personality and my mindset. I have to be flexible enough not to try and be myself too much. But to be a good designer, you have to be you because you're a profile that's developing expertise that you can apply. But you need to put that aside, the ego aside, to let the information flow without you filtering and trying to design what you want. You
Mm.
have to give the client what they need, and you
Yes.
need to help them to find that. And part of that is a wonderful saying that you teach best what you most need to learn because
Yeah.
some gurus will sit and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and espouse such deep wisdom and knowledge. But sometimes the real gurus are the quiet ones that aren't there. The true swordsman, the master swordsman, doesn't wield a sword because when there is genuine mastery, the sword, the tool, is no longer needed. It was
Mm,
just a pointing stick
yeah.
directing you. You put the sword down and you walk naked through life. And when people attack you, you don't use the sword. It's
Yes.
not necessary anymore. And it's a tough one to really wrap your head around or to come to grips with, that gardening is going to, your garden is going to compost you one day.
I love.
You
Oh,
know,
that needs to be on a t-shirt, Eric.
yeah,
You
the
go-
soil is a hungry maw that is sitting there and you're feeding it. But while you're feeding it, it's generating all of the stuff that enriches your life. But one day,
Mm.
you're going to trip and fall into that maw and it's going to eat you and it's going to feed the trees.
I love it. That's a really
Oh,
good thing. You're
goodness
right
me.
though. Very, very poignant. Let's you touched on the wood vinegar, and now like
Mm,
honestly that's something that's stuck with me a little while. I want to get, maybe we can get a little bit more into the tactical and less in the esoterical maybe. But I love all of this deep conversation. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I'm really appreciative of you going that way with me. Now, if we're talking about these kinds of technologies that you come across, as you say, it's really easy for us to go, okay, this works really, really well, and I want to impose that technique or technology on everything that I find. And as you said about the African farmer, and you're saying just throw some compost down because I know that works, and throw some cover crop down, and etc. etc. Now, when obviously you have to let go of a few of those things, as you were saying, and pick things that are going to work
mm,
really,
mm.
really well. And we're working towards the truth, really, the most effective solution in whatever situation. Can you talk to me about wood vinegar? Three questions. What is it in terms of like how is it made and where does it come from? What is it useful for? In which situations might we want to use it? And then conversely, where do we not need to use that technology?
Of course, yes, certainly. One thing that's really useful is to look at what has stood the test of time that's still there. Look at what's already existing that works. And I'm an archaeologist, funny enough, and terra preta was discovered in South America in the rainforest. It was these
Yes.
deep soil, dark soil deposits that were super rich, nutrient dense. And people looked at them and thought, you don't fit here. Where, what are you, firstly? So then they analyze it and they realize, goodness me, it's high in carbon, looks like it's ash, it's got clay particles in it, there's organics in it, and it's generating more organics over time with no humans. And then they realize, oh my word, these deposits are located around human settlement sites that have been eaten up by the rainforest and covered up. And they
Yes.
realized people were practicing farming using broken shards of clay, waste products, charcoal from their fires that they cook their food on, maybe clearing some land to start the initial farming process, but they were more holistic
Mm-hmm.
communities in that way. And they were using the charcoal as a way of improving their soil. So slash and burn works because it eats up all of the resources that are in plants, burns them, and then deposits a lot of them, some of them, into the soil, which then feeds the next cycle of plants. But because you've totally got rid of and exhausted all of those resources in one burn event, it
Mm.
fizzles out over time. And they've realized, if we've got our farming land and we can burn wood in such a way that it lasts for longer, not just as ash, but we can actually create particles by charcoal that are carbon stabilized. It's filled with pores, and those pores, goodness me, they're like a hotel. You
Yeah.
can whatever you put in them, it'll remain and release it to the soil over time. And so, well-made char is burnt in a fire that is devoid of oxygen, because
Yes.
oxygen oxidizes, breaks up, and converts things into gases, and then you
Mm-hmm.
get smoke. Very efficient. But if you get rid of the oxygen, then all of the inside pieces of the wood get burnt off and it leaves the carbon. And if you're really good, if you've got a machine that can, and that's called pyrolysis, so burning in the absence of oxygen, anaerobic burning. If you've got a machine that can do that very quickly, you can take any carbon-based life form or a product of that that's carbon-based, a cotton t-shirt, and you can blitz burn it, and you'll keep the whole woven structure of all the carbon particles in the same structure, but it's converted into charcoal.
Wow.
And you can create filters out of old clothing that is still the woven carbon fibers. But when you look under a microscope, you'll see fibers that are filled with holes and pits that you can store stuff in. And so these clever people did that. And they stay these layers of terra preta, which is the name of the type of soil. And they've subsequently discovered that in other parts of the world as well. You can use it as a storage medium. It holds moisture. It will hold fertilizer and nutrients. Bacteria and fungi will love to colonize it and fill it, etc. So that's what the char is, the process. But when you're burning something, the smoke is technically everything minus the carbon. So the fibers that make the tree trunk or the stem, all of the juices that are the nutrients and sap and lignins of the plant get burnt off. Smoke, and you watch it go. But if you capture that and you condense it into a liquid, then you've got a very special liquid that is tree minus carbon structure liquid.
Wow.
And that has got all the minerals and nutrients that the tree or that particular species is good at drawing in. So those condensates they have discovered have active ingredients that stimulate seeds to germinate. If you use it at a very high concentration, you can sterilize and clean and kill off bacteria and fungi.
Wow.
You do it at a lower concentration rate, it becomes a fertilizer. If you do it at a very low concentrate, it becomes a growth stimulant. And so it depends on the concentrated value of it. And so that's what wood vinegar essentially is. And the science can get deep into that and separate that out and say there's wood vinegar and there's wood vinegar and there's wood vinegar. Different qualities of it. But that's sorry.
I was going to say, is that the same as how often we have some species that can only germinate their seeds after being through fire or through smoke? Is that a similar type of situation, or because it has those compounds in that?
This is how wonderful ecology is. Some plants have evolved the need for burn to clear an area, to convert it back to bacterial so that they can flourish. And this is where nature seems nice, but it is warfare. And they survive through their seeds. But it's also an ecological change. So in nature, nothing happens with one purpose. So there's no one person with a grand idea and I'm going to do this. It needs 3, 5, 10, 20 reasons for it to stand the test of time. And so a burning event not only stimulates the germination of the species that evolved to do it, it stimulates a whole different growth approach in soil. So a hot fire will kill off fungi, but a bacteria can sometimes go dormant or create a cyst and survive hot and dry, hot and dry, hot and dry. That's why bacterial soils that are high exposure have bacteria and not fungi. The fungi are gentle and not gentle, more prone to dying back. They need cover, protection, moisture, and nutrients. And so you can use you can use wood vinegar to stimulate those species. So if you've got a driveway and you spray it with wood vinegar, chances are you're going to get frontline colonizing bacterial-based soil weeds germinate like crazy.
Wow, really?
Okay. But your fungi will be suppressed. You'll have nutrients released. But you could also, the samurai used to use wood vinegar. They used to bathe in it because all their cuts and wounds and bruises, your body would absorb it, get a nutrient hit like foliar feeding, helps with your immunity and your resilience, but it will cleanse a wound, sterilize it, and help it at the right concentration to feed the skin to repair and to grow.
Wow. That's really cool.
If they used it at full concentration, they might get cancer and get very sick.
Goodness
Not
me.
cancer, but they might have
Yeah.
an adverse, just like digitalis can kill you, but
Yeah.
it can also help people with heart conditions.
Hmm.
So that's wood vinegar, and you can use it as a pesticide or a fungicide at a high concentration, but you can dial it back to fertilize plants. You could use it to, if you've had nematode issues, you can use it on soils to reset them,
Mm-hmm.
kill off, and then recolonize. Because once it breaks down into lignins, amino
Yeah.
acids, all the sugars and stuff that were in the plant are natural products, and then that feeds everything. And they've done research in agriculture and realized that wood vinegar applied can increase fungal regrowth by up to 700%. So
Goodness
this isn't
me.
insignificant. This is significant. And
Yeah.
bacterial too. And you can find a balance with your ratios of your concentrations of wood vinegar use to create quite a holistic soil management
Wow.
approach to. So
So
wood vinegar and biochar come hand in hand because it's a byproduct of biochar production.
I've got so many questions. This is fascinating. Let's go. First one. Uh, okay, so when you were talking about having the specific material that was burnt draws out those nutrients that that particular plant was good at drawing in. So my knowledge tells me that when you've got a tree and it's, losing its organic matter and it's dropping on the soil and that's being broken down to then feed that plant, usually what's coming off that plant is in the right concentrations to feed itself and create this self-perpetual system for the most part. That's my
Unless the
understanding.
soil that it's growing in has an inherent nutrient deficiency, then the tree will express that deficiency in its growth too.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. But say let's optimum conditions,
Yeah.
it has everything it needs. So if you're if you're using wood vinegar to fertilize or provide any kind of nutrients to your garden, does it matter what was used to create that wood vinegar? And would local species or similar species to what you're growing be beneficial to use?
If you're practicing remineralization, so balancing your soils and addressing deficiencies, then the plants you use, if they are grown at optimum health, will have high sap sugar levels with a diverse range of nutrients, high Brix levels,
Mm-hmm.
which will reduce pest pressure because the plants are saturated with strong growth.
Yep.
Then those plants would produce a well-balanced wood vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
But remember, when you're looking at a landscape, you're not seeing perfection, you're seeing progress.
Mm.
Because those plants that are growing there are an ecological response to the type of soil that is there.
Mm.
And certain plants will not be triggered to grow when there's an iron deficiency or a boron deficiency. You'll see the plants that can survive without it
Yes.
and might be able to, through multiple generations, slowly alter the soil conditions that free up boron that could be present but not
Mm-hmm.
accessible,
Yes.
or they can mine it from further and bring it in,
Mm-hmm.
or they bring in animals that are eating and foraging from outlying areas that don't have that deficiency
And
that
bringing it
bring them
in.
in.
Mm.
Because humans are not separate from their habitats. Plants are not a habitat on their own. Plants need humans, need the animals, fauna and flora, need the soil biology to create a shifting, holistic system
Mm.
of transition. So it's quite interesting.
That's very interesting. So then
Mm.
you can somewhat be selective in the plants that you use for your wood vinegar based on what you might want to add to the soil to guide that towards a homeostasis and that type of thing.
Absolutely. Now,
Yeah.
the challenge is that with biochar production, you collect and produce a very small quantity of wood vinegar. It's
Mm.
like
I'm imagining.
nectar,
Yeah.
magic nectar, gummy berry juice. It's really special stuff. And the reason behind that is when you look at a tree or a plant, there's often an assumption that that plant is made up of minerals and nutrients brought out of the soil. But up to 80% of the plant is actually made out of air.
Mm.
Carbon dioxide, it's carbon.
Mm.
And the carbon is the carbon-based life form, meaning the carbon creates the structure of the stems and the leaves, the skeleton that hold it
Mm.
up. Those cells, which have walls made from carbon and xylem and flume made from carbon, get filled with liquids through water that can harvest and hold the minerals and nutrients in the soil. So when you
Mm.
burn them, 80% might be the carbon and only 20% is the liquids. Now,
Mm.
those liquids change through the burning process, and where it was a sugar or an amino acid, it gets denatured and broken down into its mineral components, and
Mm.
that's what you get condensed into your wood
Right.
vinegar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So sometimes chopping and dropping, well, that's the most holistic and quickest way to balance soil. But you've got to remember that if you keep chopping and dropping the same plant in the same place, you're just going to recirculate the same mineral deficiency. That's why you need diverse range of species growing in that same soil with different capacities to harvest and hold nutrient profiles that are very different. So you're introducing new ones. And sometimes it's best to chop and drop there, or chop here and drop there, and chop there and drop there.
Yes.
And your compost should be diverse, made from diverse species. And your
Mm.
wood vinegar, hopefully, your biochar is made from a diverse range. Many people look at, hemp or hardwood timbers because they're hard because they've got lots of carbon.
Mm.
And they've got very thick carbon, which makes a very dense structure that can hold, it's got many rooms in it,
Mm.
pores in it that can hold a lot more.
Hold all of that
Um,
life.
yeah, but there will be, as research goes on, you'll find that you probably need some soft woods mixed in with a range of different things, seed coatings, stems,
Mm.
wood, roots, and holistically, a diverse biochar would create a diverse wood vinegar, which would create a diverse range of outcomes in the soil.
Yeah, and that's really it, isn't it? Because that's the central, the central stem, I guess, to nature is diversity. Like it
Mm.
works better every time when there's more diversity. Uh,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
so having any kind of diversity in any of your products is going to be beneficial.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
Going back to Terra Preta, because that's something that's interests me a lot. And I actually did a small video on Terra Preta, kind of introducing people to the idea about that discovery. Can you talk to how it is a self-perpetuating soil without human contact? Because that's something that I didn't quite understand. Because I understand that obviously, if you've got carbon in the soil or any kind of organic matter that breaks down slowly over time, it's going to generally feed that soil over time. But how is it then being added to, or how is it self-perpetuating in that way without
Mm.
human intervention?
Uh, Rainforests are well known for leaching and losing minerals and nutrients very quickly. The high rainfall
Hmm.
just simply carries nutrients away. And that's why a lot of life in the rainforests inhabits often a very narrow band. Now, that's a bit inaccurate because we can find microbe activity 2 kilometers underground,
Wow.
specialized microbes that live way down there. But that's a hyperdense layer in rainforests. The more
Hmm.
deciduous and cooler the forest, the deeper down they can often penetrate to because it's slow composting.
Hmm. Yes.
Tropics are hot composting. Hot
Yes.
composting is quick, rapid turnover, rapid release, grow quickly, die young scenario.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, in time, when they produced biochar and they introduced it to terra preta soils, they added clay, they added bones, they added a diverse
Hmm.
range of species. And those biochar deposits and the clay, which holds a lot of minerals and nutrients and breaks down very slowly, work well together. They would feed the microbes, they'd hold minerals and nutrients and stop them leaching out, and the whole ecologies that are associated with that change.
Mm.
So species, the way the rainforest is structured is usually based on nutrient management, and you
Yeah.
get a turnover in succession that suits that. But if you suddenly create a soil that's impregnated and can hold into minerals and nutrients in a different way, plants will grow differently, and it's maybe the carrying capacity of the rainforest would increase. And
Mm.
so what you have is this system where more plants, more species, greater biomass is constantly cycling because that soil can sustain it. And so that the
Yes.
ecology fluctuates and changes. And they found that soils in areas where terra preta was generated accumulate organics at a higher rate and for longer than those without it.
Okay.
Now, it's probably not a perpetual machine because nature will always use excesses
Yes.
and process it and move it. But if a well-made biochar could last, they say 800 years, but some terra preta soils are over 2,000 years old.
Goodness me.
That's a long time for trees and genetics and epigenetics to recycle and repeat and
Mm.
repeat and repeat and evolve different coping mechanisms. So
That's so true. Okay, that makes a lot of sense because, yeah, I thought, indefinite perpetual systems would mean that you probably would need to introduce more biochar. So, but eventually the system might cause a fire somewhere, it might dry out, the ecosystem changes. You then have all of this biochar return back to the soil and then it changes again and comes back. So that's part of maybe these natural cycles. Is so in terms of biochar for us in our gardens and things like that,
mm,
how are we to introduce biochar and what are some methodologies or reasons why we would want to? What do you suggest to people?
yeah, sure. Well, biochar is technically a storage mechanism.
Mm.
I mean, it introduces carbon, which is great for the environment because it's instead of having car fumes going into the environment causing greenhouse gas issues, you're storing it in a very stable form.
Hmm.
So there's a tick there for environmental mindsets. If you want to do something that outlasts you and you want to help the environment for generations, then putting biochar into the ground is great. But if you're creating biochar with a wasteful fire,
Yeah, it's
you're
putting it all into the
fuming.
atmosphere,
That's
right?
right. So you need to think it through and create an efficient closed loop, if you can, as much as possible, way to do it. Now, there are people out there like Rob Tonks from Australian Hardwood Charcoal that's got a totally enclosed environment. He can store the energy from his biochar production and he can produce hyper high quality biochar that's paramagnetic, that's got
Yes.
imbued with so many qualities that your standard person using a retort in the garden or a kiln, outside kiln can't.
Hmm.
So there's the Ferrari biochars and there's the non-Ferrari. But a little bit of biochar in soils is better than no biochar. If you've got a soil that's compacted, let's say clays, if you add biochar to it, you'll be adding a media that's got airspace like perlite, but opens it up, it keeps the airflow, doesn't
To
compact.
oxygenate the soil a bit
It'll
better.
drain well, it'll oxygenate, and any nutrients that are wonderful nutrients in your clay, instead of draining out, will have the storage space within the biochar. So your roots would love it and your soil microbiology would love it.
Yeah, because
You
they
go to
live
the,
in that, don't they?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So you go to the other side of the scale, which is a sand that is very open, that drains, that gets dry, and it
Hmm.
might be very rich in silicates, but it doesn't hold minerals and nutrients much.
Yeah.
So you
Hmm.
either need to put lots of compost in there to make it spongy, or you can put biochar in there that'll hold moisture
Water.
and
Yeah.
minerals and nutrients.
Okay.
Um, and there's a magic balance. They say 2% by volume of your soil for carbon is all you really need to create a holistic ecological result that works quite well. But with biochar, sometimes they are looking at, there's been some research that suggests between 10 and 15% is the pinnacle.
Hmm.
Anything beyond 15% creates a soil that is always hungry, and you could have
Yeah.
problems with not being able to feed it enough. So it becomes a very intensive soil that you constantly have to recharge this biochar hotel with minerals and nutrients.
Hmm. Makes
If you
sense.
if you're up to that, you're a market gardener, then you can hyperdrive your production. But the moment you start stepping back, you might start getting a few nutrient deficiencies. So 10 to 15% is maybe as high as you should go.
Okay.
But if you've got a soil that drains well, that is high CEC or high nutrients holding capacity, and you've got good compost levels in it, high organics in it, you might not need biochar. But I find that potting mixes in raised beds are always hungry, always decompose, they break down. So biochar, I go to town and I'm currently planning. I've got red crasnosem soils in the redlands here, the red soil.
Yes.
I'm aiming to achieve 10 to 15% by volume biochar.
Yeah, okay. And is this a top dress or are you trying to turn this in?
How deep does a rabbit hole go?
True.
No, there's liquid biochar
Oh, okay. Right.
that you
Right.
could use to water your soils to impregnate it with micronized biochar that can get deep without turning or tilling.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, there's magics in there too, but it's difficult to get hold of it.
Hmm.
Rob produces it, and I've been running trials with him, comparing productivity in 3 vegetable spaces and
Brilliant.
seeing what happens. But I am also using biochar in a range of sizes. I'm finding that between 0.3 mil and 5 mil offers a broad spectrum of balance. If you've got very big chunky biochar, you're going to have a huge chunk, and the core of it very rarely gets filled and used.
Yes,
It'll
yes,
be the
yes.
perimeter. So you really want to try and mash it up and break it into smaller than 5 mils, preferably 1 mil if you can. And then you've got a nice balance between surface area, etc.
Yeah,
But
okay.
I'm using a range of different ones. I'm using different sizes, micronized, but I'm also working with Rob with using liquid biochar to charge it. Now,
Mate,
it's important to remember
yeah.
that there is a huge challenge nowadays where people think that charcoal is biochar. It's
It's
not.
not. No.
You put it straight in your soil, you can create all sorts of imbalances that can last for a while until your
Mm.
soils recharge it. But you need to take char, charge it with minerals and nutrients, and then you need to inoculate or impregnate it with life, living
Mm.
soil biology to make char biochar. That
Yes.
bio is, I can't understate it. It
It's
has to be
missing. Yeah.
biochar.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Because that honestly, that's where my brain first thought when I heard the term biochar. I thought, is that just charcoal? And it's not. It's not at all. It's as you learn, it's certainly not that. But
Mm,
it can be, I guess. You can create your own and all that sort of thing. But biochar is something that I'm introducing
mm,
into the garden myself,
mm,
and I have got a hold of a wonderful product from Red Soil Organics doing the paramagnetic biochar, which is wonderful. Well, I haven't, I just trust their process, and that was my first introduction to it. But I'm
mm,
going to
mm,
introduce that and see how I go into
mm,
the soil, the compost that I'm creating for this front garden area. But
mm,
it's such an interesting topic, and I feel like I
mm,
could talk to you about so many of these things for a long, long time. Now, I want to wrap up this conversation because I'm aware of how long we've been going, and I feel as if we could do another conversation down the track and kind of really dive into so many of these other topics. But Eric, what can people do to follow you or follow your journey or dive into the things that you're talking about? Because I certainly want to myself a little bit more, keep up with what you're doing and
mm.
see into your day to day, your perspective, your garden, and all of those types of things. Where can we find you?
Certainly. I've got a business called United Natures. Uh, United Natures Design follows my living architecture.
Hmm.
United Nature's Edible Garden follows my home shenanigans, where I'm learning. It's the homestead, United Nature's Homestead. We're here in Thornlands on the Redlands coast. And
Yes.
I've got Instagram and Facebook pages. I'm not very tech savvy, but I share stories, I share updates and ideas and concepts there. And I'm going to be hosting workshops because I've received a lot of feedback that it would be helpful to start condensing a lot of these different subjects, bringing them together for people into a central place, a hub where we can discuss it and explore it. And just as you mentioned, it's so important to have a space that you can physically take people through, a demonstration site where you can look at the pros and cons and the process. You can look at the failures and how to
Mm,
build on those failures to make different outcomes that are very helpful. And
yes.
so United Natures is probably the first starting.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you.
Mm.
And I'd love to, as you mentioned, come and check out your space and possibly highlight it a bit further of what you're doing and kind of do that. So I'd love to stay in contact about that. But
Thank you.
thank you so much, Eric, for your time today. I absolutely find what you're saying totally invaluable. I think it's just a fresh perspective that not too many of us are hearing these days.
Mm, mm,
And I'm
mm.
really appreciative of you sharing that with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Everything you're saying resonates with everything I'm also trying to embody in life and work. And I think we need lots of voices covering that, lots of perspectives. It's a rich space to play in, isn't
It is. It certainly
it?
is.
Yeah.
You're right. All right, everybody, and there we have it. Unfortunately, we had to put an end to that conversation. I could have spoken to Eric for a long, long time, and I'm very excited to go and visit Eric at his place and to dive into exactly what he's got going on there. So hopefully stay tuned for that content as I'm going to take you along for the ride and go and see what Eric is up to and really get an idea of how all of these concepts coming to fruition in his garden with the challenges that he's facing, the successes, the failures, and all in between. So I'm sure that you're going to find just as much value as I am selfishly from going and visiting Eric. But please go and check out his channels. They will be linked in the show notes in the description below, as always, and follow along because Eric's perspective is something that we're greatly missing in today's society, and I'm taking on board as much as I possibly can to approach my gardening life and life in general. So that concludes today's episode. If you enjoyed the episode, which I really, really hope you did, please leave it a review. Give it some stars, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you're listening or watching this. Let me know because your feedback really helps me to improve the show, to get it to more people, get more listeners, and hopefully to inspire and empower more people to get out there and into the garden and creating a natural life using natural cycles. So, thank you very much. That's it from me. I'm going to leave a very happy man, and I'll see you again very soon on the next episode. Take care.